Did you know you can pop off your items from your units when you are upgrading them? Do you know why it's more difficult to find units in some situations? Well, if you are unsure about these two questions, then this video is meant for you. I'm Ruby, I've been challenger for many sets, and I would like to share you 10 tips and tricks that are incredibly useful for players who recently started on TFT. This video will help you build a stronger board, craft better items, and earn more gold than your opponents. Basically, everything you need to know to become an intermediate player. I'm also attaching to this video a transcript you can use as a cheat sheet. It is on Tactor, a place where I write many things about TFT, and you can access to the cheat sheet with the link in the description. It's completely free, of course. Alright, let's get started. TFT can be extremely tough to start if you don't really know exactly what to play and what kind of team you want to build. So my first tip is to gravitate towards extremely simple comps that allow you to progress TFT while of course having fun and have the opportunity to win games. These comps are easy to recognize because they mainly rely on 2 or 3 maximum traits with 1 dominant trait. For instance, we can use the Story Weather comp, which summons Kale to fight alongside you. The core trait of this comp is Story Weather. We actually kinda like to call this as a vertical. And to this vertical, we are adding a few minor interesting traits, like Dragon Lord for instance. I can give you another example with the Heavenly Vertical, which provides plenty of stats for the whole team. This comp is supplemented by other minor traits such as Behemoth, Ghostly, Reaper, and Sage to add interesting bonuses for the main units you're playing. Basically, whenever you try to play a comp, try always to think of playing one vertical and add a few different synergies to it and just have fun with them. Obviously, some of them will be stronger than others, but we'll talk about that later. Then for the second advice I would like to give you, I want to talk about building a competitive team. As you already know, if you purchase 3 copies of a unit, it will upgrade into a 2-star. And if you have 3 copies of a 2-star unit, it will upgrade into a 3-star. So it means that if you want to make a 3-star unit, you need to have 9 copies of a 1-star unit. But this is something you already know. What you might not know is the difference of power between a 1-star unit to a 2-star unit to a 3-star unit. On average, a 2-star unit will be 1.8 times stronger than a 1-star unit, and a 3-star unit will be, on average, 1.8 times stronger than a 2-star unit. So let's revisit again the Story Weather comp I showed earlier. If all my units are 2 stars, I have on average a board that's almost twice stronger than the same board, but only with 1-star unit. And this is why having multiple 2-star units, especially on your main tank and your main carry, is exactly what you're looking for during the early game, mid game, and late game, because this is what is going to make your board much stronger compared to others. For the third tip, I just want to say something. Nobody is stopping you from copying in TFT. So how do you essentially copy an opponent and how you can turn that into knowledge that you can play for the future? So I kind of want to say, it's very straightforward. Every time your team gets crushed by another team, just make sure to visit your opponent's board, and you can do that by clicking on their little legends and you can look at their board. And from that point, you can try to even take screenshots and try to analyze why this board is much stronger than mine, what are the traits he's playing, what are the units he's playing, and what are the items he's putting on the units. If you do that consistently, you will actually not only learn what's actually good in the meta, but you will also have ideas of actually inspiration to play other comps. And this is exactly what I did when I started playing TFT. I simply looked at what was strong and what was weak, and I was trying to play the other comps I've seen and just like try many comps, and I had a lot of fun that way. And I was getting better at the same time. Okay, for the fourth tips, this time is a small tips I would like to share with you because this is not necessarily shown or told in TFT, and I'm sure like for beginners it can be quite confusing and can take some time before they actually understand it. So if you play TFT, you will see that sometimes under the little legend you will see some swords, and these swords mean that you will face potentially this opponent the next turn. There's a matchmaking in TFT that makes it quite complicated to track everyone. So in TFT there's a matchmaking that's not totally random. The thing is, when we are still 8 players alive in a game, you can't face the same player before 5 rounds. So it means that after 5 rounds you have the chance to play against him again, and if we take that into account, then we can say that after 5 rounds you will always have potentially 3 different opponents, because that's all there are left since you already faced others before. So you can't know exactly who you're going to face next turn, but you can narrow down to 3 players so you can position yourself or check deck board regularly and try to optimize your chances to win the next fight if you position against those 3 players instead of positioning against 7 other players. Okay, now let's talk about unit pools. Maybe you have heard about it, maybe you don't, and this is something that's extremely important to understand, especially if we are beginners, because this is something we cannot guess or we cannot know if we never heard about it basically. So in simple terms, there isn't an infinite number of copies of units in the game. So if many players have certain units, such as Irelia on their boards, your chances of finding one Irelia decreases significantly. So you have to imagine that each game, it has a massive bag containing all the copies of all units in the game. And when the player rolls their shop, they randomly draw 5 copies of units from this shared pool, which is distributed among the 8 players. That is important to have an understanding of 2 features. First is the champion pool I just talked about, and if you want to have more knowledge about the number of available of copies, you will know that it's based on their tier. So for instance, if you're looking for tier 1 unit, you have 22 copies of each tier 1 unit, meaning 22 with Kha'Zix, 22 Ahri, stuff like that. And for tier 2 units, you have 20 copies. For tier 3 units, you have 17. For tier 4 units, you have 10. And for tier 5, you have 9. That's why I said Irelia is extremely hard to find if a lot of other people have already 1 or 2 or 3 Irelia on their board, because the pool of Irelia is extremely small. And if you want to take even another example still with Irelia, if 3 players have Irelia 2, then it means that 3 players have 3 copies of Irelia, meaning that the 9 Irelia in the pool are already taken out and you can't find Irelia anymore until one of them sell Irelia or die. So now let's talk about the odds. This is a little bit more obvious than the champion pool because in the game you have a little UI that shows you the odds for your level. So the odds is simply the probability of getting champions of different tiers depending on your level at the time when you are rolling your shop. For instance, if you're level 6, you have 30% chance of getting a tier 1 unit per slot in the shop, 40% for tier 2, 25% for tier 3, 5% for tier 4, and obviously 0% for tier 5. So if you're looking for things like Nico or Riven, so actually being level 6 means that you have the most chance to find them. But obviously if you're looking for Irelia, you have no chance to find her when you're level 6. So now we talked about building a comp, let's talk about items, because it's good to have an army, but if they are equipped with sticks and stones, you're not going to expect to win a war, right? So it is the same with TFT, and with so many items in the game, it can be easy to get a headache when you have to start crafting them. So fortunately, Riot is well aware of this difficulty, and they actually added some UI not that long ago, and I find it very useful, especially for beginners. To use it, you simply need to right click on the unit and hover over the dial below the item slots. You will see then a short list of 6 items that Riot recommends for the specific unit, and of course you also have the recipe to craft them. So if you started to play TFT recently, I highly recommend aiming to place 3 recommended items on your main unit rather than spreading one item on each different character you have on the board. Over time, you will become much more capable of identifying the best items for your units without relying on this little help. Since we are talking about items, let me slip a little tip that very few beginners know and that can help you so much sometimes in situations where you're making 3-star units. If you happen to have 2 copies of a unit on the board, both equipped with items, and you're going to merge them into a fully upgraded unit, you can control which items will remain on the unit and which ones will be transferred back to your bench. There are a couple of rules there, and what you mostly need to remember is that firstly, the game will always try to fill the 3 available item slots on the upgraded unit. And if there's no more space, then the game will randomly remove excess items and place them back on your bench. However, there's a priority here, and here's how to play with it. If among the 2 copies of the units merging, one has more valuable items to you than the other, leave that one on the board and place the other one on the bench before purchasing the 3rd copy that will initiate the merge. That way you will signal to the game that you want to keep the items of the unit on the board, and these items will have priority when you upgrade the unit. If you want to have a little bit more precision about that, we can have the full priority list, which is first of all these gloves on the bench, then full items on the bench, and finally components, meaning that these gloves will always take over full item as long as it's on the same board or bench. The last point I want to address regarding items is optimizing items for mana generation. As you know, units will use the special ability when the mana gauge fills up completely. As for many units, their impact in fight depends mainly on their abilities, so these units must have the right mana generation item to utilize their food potential. In case you didn't know, there are 3 ways to obtain mana in the game. First of all units will gain 10 mana with each basic attack. Also, all units gain a bit of mana based on the damage they receive. And some augments, traits or items allow periodic mana generation. Usually it's every 3 seconds and you have things like Invoker or other augments like that. As you can guess, most tanks will generate mana by taking damage, and it's often unnecessary to give them mana generation items. So that's why we will focus on the 3 main mana generation items for DPS units. First of all, we have Shojin, that is an item that grants 15 mana per basic attack instead of 10. It's excellent for any DPS units with a huge mana bar that is a multiple of 15. We have Azir and Wei who are good holder of Shojin. Then we have Blue Buff that reduces the max mana by 10. It's an excellent item for any units with 40 or less maximum mana, so units like Syndra and Kog'Maw will particularly appreciate this item. And finally, we have the Adaptive Helm, which generates mana every 3 seconds if you put the units in a backline. In general, this item is slightly less optimal compared to other 2 I just talked about, but it serves as a very good replacement if you can't get the perfect components for Shojin or Blue Buff. And actually, if you have doubt about how to build your items for your characters, I also have a cheat sheet on Tactor. I'll put the link in the description, and in this cheat sheet that I update every week, you will have all the 3 best items for every character in the game, or at least the DPS character, not necessarily the tanks, because this is a bit less useful. So now let's talk about the 2 last tips, which is about making more gold in the game so you can have just more purchasing power and have more chance to buy XP or expensive units. Because after all, you need a large amount of gold to buy levels, roll the shops, and purchase units. Although everyone earns 5 gold per turn, there are ways you can use to optimize your gold generation, and that will allow you to double the amount of gold earned per turn. The simplest and most well-known way is to generate interest. In TFT, the more gold you have, the more you will earn through interest as a rate of 1 gold for every 10 gold increments. Of course, there's a limit. You can't earn more than 5 golds in interest per turn, and so there's no point in keeping more than 50 gold, unless you have a specific augment that allows you to go beyond the 5 gold interest. So it's important for you to quickly reach the first interest thresholds to snowball your economy and generate much more gold than your opponent. Also, I want to sneak in a little tip. You can already start earning interest gold during the first stage before you face other players in PvP. So clearly don't hesitate to reach 10 gold as quickly as possible and start earning interest much before others. And finally, the other way to generate gold every turn is to have a streak. A streak is a consecutive number of PvP battles when you finish with the same score, either all losses or all wins. You will earn 1 additional gold if you have a streak of 3 or 4, 2 gold for a streak of 5, and 3 gold for a streak of 6. This means that if you have had 6 consecutive losses or wins against other players, you can generate 3 gold per turn more than other players who aren't on the streak. So always try to be on the streak, especially during stage 2 if you can afford, because it will easily allow you to generate a large amount of gold that other players won't have, making it easier for you to buy experience or search for specific units. Now that you know all these tips and tricks, you simply need to practice and grab your first victories. However, TFT is never a totally balanced game, and they are always stronger compared to others. If you are unsure about what comp to play, I recommend watching this video where I shared all the training comps you might want to play. See you at the top of the ladder.